what we didn't finish yesterday, which was basically checkboxes. How do we handle checkboxes in React? How can we think of selects in React? And well, we have sort of talked about handling the submission already, but we can also think about how can we make some fields like require, or how can we check for them before the user tries to submit a form to basically validate the input, which is something that we want to do a lot of the time. We want to check that whatever the user put in the form is valid, right? Or that they don't submit the empty form, for instance. So then after that, we are going to be working in the lab, which I saw that some of you have already checked out. That is basically exercising forms. So let's look at, let me open up the code that we were working on yesterday. Oh, I also, I don't know if you saw, but I put in on Slack, the class chat channel, I put that code in a repo, the code that we had yesterday, for you to inspect later on. I'm just gonna keep working on that. And also I'm uploading the videos for like this unit. I'm uploading to this YouTube playlist that I also linked to on Slack, so that instead of like me having to share every single video link, you just expect that video in the playlist. Cool, so let me open up the project again. I think it's core, unit 4. I think we were in React state, let's see. Because we were building on the project from the previous lab. I think it's this one. No. Did I call it React? I guess I'm just gonna clone it from the one that I shared yesterday. I forgot where I put mine. So let's just clone this. React Forms. Also from this project, I removed all the other stuff that we were not using, like the service worker, some CSS that we were not using, the logo. So I leaned out the project a little bit, just removing stuff that we were not using. So we basically have the public just has the index.html, manifest, and favicon. And source only our index that is rendering our app component, and just app.js, which is actually our component. And that's pretty much it. So let's just look where we left yesterday. Let's actually install the dependencies. Like from what we saw yesterday, is there anything that we should like review today? And basically handling that input, the username or the password, and maybe the reset button. Anything that I should maybe re-explain or go over again? Yes, you will. Yeah. Yeah, sure. So also, I wanted to, I'm not sure if this resource is linked in the lecture note. I think it's not. But this, make sure to check out this resource, which is like from the official documentation. I'm gonna share this on Slack. Then maybe I can link it later on the lesson. But this is basically where we took this lesson material from, right? This is the official documentation, and they walk you through how to implement a form. So I'll say, like, don't stay just with what we're showing you here. Try to check these extra resources as well. So going back to here, let's run this. Let me open this now. So to explain back what Hupel mentioned is, and this is in the official documentation as well, where it turns out that all the input boxes, all DOM elements, they keep their own internal state. So like before, when the thinking of without React, when you type in a box, on an input box, that text is being saved within that box in the value property, right? We know that we have access to that input. I'm just not sure where to put this table. Just put it out. So this all started because we were thinking of how can we have access to the text that is within an input box without having to do document.query selector to grab this box and then access the value. Everything started like with that question, like how can we grab the input value with this point basically here? How can we grab the input value? So what we did was we said, okay, let's put an unchanged event listener here that will be fired whenever I type any letter in this input box. So this box represents the input box. And then we're gonna store those keystrokes. We're gonna store the value that the user is inputting in this box in the state of our component. So we did that, and we did that with this part. Let's go sort of remove that. But we did this with the unchanged property of the input. And we said whenever the content of this input box changes, let's call this function handle username change. And what this function is doing is, if we go up here, this function is just setting the state, setting the username value property of the state to be equal to the event that target that value. And remember that with all event listeners, this is true when we were doing just DOM manipulation with plain HTML and JavaScript. To event listeners, the event object is always passed as an argument. This function here, this function is an event listener. Why is this function an event listener? Like why? Like what does it make it an event listener? Might sound like a trick question, but it's not. Like what makes a function an event listener as opposed to just a function? Yes. Not exactly, because I can pass the event or a function can expect an event argument even if it's not an event listener. Where is this? Yeah, Owen.
Listens for like a change like the
Mm-hmm.
reacts to it.
Wait, say that again?
So it listens for a change in the DOM instead of reacts to it.
Yeah, no, actually, like that is. So I was thinking about that. I was thinking about the name of this framework called React, and I think you're not far from. Well, I don't know the official story, but I think it is related to that. It's about having a reactive application that reacts to user interaction, and then they came up with React and state. But what makes this function an event listener is the fact that it's being called when the change event happens in the input box. Any function that is like being called on an event happening in any element, that is an event listener. So what makes this function an event listener is the fact that we're using it as a callback, as a function that will be called when an event happens. In this case, what kind of event? A change event. And a regular function, we can call it anywhere else, like let's say the render is a regular function. And so on. So we said, so the problem was, okay, how can we have access to the text that the user types here? We came up with, okay, let's attach an event listener that will listen for a change event happening in this box. Whenever that change event happens, let's access the value, or through the event that happened, we have access to the target of that event, meaning where was that event happening. In this case, it was happening in the input box. And then through the event target, which is the input box, we have access to the value property, which contains the text that you type in there. And then we're going to just save that text that is in the event target value to the state. So we sort of conceptually, sort of drawing here as this diagram, we are connecting our input box to our state through having an onChange. Having an onChange that will take care of whenever you type any letter here, whenever you type, you remove, whenever you type or delete a character inside of these blocks, the onChange function will be called. So if I type in A, the change event was fired by me typing or by a user typing that letter. Then the function got called. The handle username was called. The handle username change was called. And if we remember, that function what it's doing is just setting the state, setting a property on the state that is username val or username value to contain the event target that value property. Remember that the event target is the input box. The value property will be the content of that input box. So what that ends up doing is setting the state, the username value to the event target value ends up putting A here, whatever we type here. Then we type another letter, change happens again, the state gets updated with the new value. and so on. As we type E, the change happens again, the value gets saved onto our state, and this is all happening. This is actually happening really fast. We're just here I'm breaking it down and sort of slowing down the process so that we're aware of what this function is doing. Lastly, let's say we do the last one, and then we end up. So we use this mechanism to have access to the input value, the text that we have in here. We basically, on every keystroke, we are saving whatever the value of that box is into our state. This is how we can grab whatever the user types on a box. So back to your question here, Paul. This is where we end up with the string or the word Alejo being in two places. Here we have in our computer memory, Alejo is in some place in memory that is sort of like reserved for this input box. And then my state has some place in memory reserved also for it. And in there I have another string, Alejo, right? And so it turns out that we end up with this string Alejo in two places, right? And that can cause our UI, our user interface, to go out of sync. And the example was, so what if we have a reset button? Like, how would we implement a reset button? The way in which you implement a reset button in React, instead of having, well, the way that we will do it with HTML and JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, is we just grab the input from the DOM and set the value property of the input to the empty string, right? Remember that in React, you never want to do DOM manipulation, straight DOM manipulation, like query selector, add a listener, and the like. So the way in which we implement this button is, well, if we first need to get rid of this part of the fact that we have this information in two separate places that exists in the text box, and it also exists on my state. And to implement this button, what we do is we take advantage of this circle or this loop that we conceptually can think of when we're creating React apps. So the way then in which we will implement this button, and Douglas suggested, okay, let's have this button just reset the state, or put the state back to the empty string, right? And we actually did that yesterday. We have, when you hit this reset button, this it's gonna fire a function called like handle reset. I don't remember what we called it, but what that function is gonna do is it's gonna call the set state function, and it's gonna pass an empty string to be the username value. So that erases the state. It puts back an empty string, and then we have the state of our application, the state of our component of our app here, got out of sync with what the user is seeing, which is this letter will still remain here. That is because this is what is known as we're reading from this input box. We're reading the value, but we're never writing the new value out of the state. And that's what we need to do with explicitly setting the value property of this input box to be whatever we have in the state. If we want this reset button to work, what we want to do is connect the state back to our input box through the value property, where we basically say something like, I think it fits here. Through the value property, so that anything that happens to the state, like the reason why we want to have this is So anything that happens to the state also happens to the input box, basically. If the input box gets whatever text, we want that to keep that state. We want to keep that text in our state. If our state changes because they hit the reset button, then we want whatever happens to our state to reflect in our UI, to reflect in the content of this input box. So if we have a button to reset that we want to clear out the input box with, then we'll need to connect and conceptually have this this sort of loop here. And I know that, like, yeah, as I said yesterday, you're gonna develop a feeling for this as we move along, and as you start to see how something changed in your state, but it was not reflect like in what the user will see, and as we fix those bugs, basically. Yeah. So like going back to this also. So the user is typing letters, right? So this is the user interaction, and every letter that the user types in that box corresponds as one user interaction, right? So we have the user types in A, that calls that state because we have an unchanged listener. The state is updated, then render is called, and then the user sees the letter A appearing on the text box. That also happens really fast. Like you type a letter and it's immediate. It appears in that box immediately. But we know that all of this stuff is going on. When you type a letter, the set state happens, the state gets updated, and render gets called. And it's just that all that happens so fast that we don't even notice it. But so A's type, the state was updated with the letter A. Then the user saw the letter A because of the render. Then the user types the next letter, the set state gets called, the state is updated, the render gets called. And on the example for the reset button, what we have is the user interaction is the user clicks on this button, right? Which will call set state, the function that we have on click on that button will call set state. The state is updated, and now because our input box is reading the value, is reading its content from the state, and now we erase the content with the reset button, then when we go back to the render, because on render is that we're saying, I want the value of my input box to be this.state.user val, and now that is empty, then the user will see the input box going back to an empty input box. And that is basically what React calls wanting to have a single source of truth. Let's see. Let me go over here. Yeah, this is a must-read, basically. This documentation of form. Let's do single source control components. Yeah. Make sure that you read this to sort of like hear what I was explaining in a few different words, and also see some other examples. So let's move on to how to handle like checkboxes. But it's literally the same thing, but we're just changing from an input box to a checkbox, and instead of the value property to a checked property. So let's add a checkbox to our component here. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to set, say, input. And I know that I'm going to use a few properties, so I'm going to say into like multiple lines, I'm going to say type equal checkbox. There is no placeholder. Let's leave the checked for now, and let's call the handle. Let's add the function that will fire when the change happens on the checkbox. So let's do this, that handle checkbox change. This is a function that I haven't written yet. I am going to do that next. So I'm going to put a label on it so that you can click the label. One, we have a written clue for what the checkbox is about. I'm going to say I'm not a robot. And I'm going to wrap basically that input on my label. Oh, I guess oh, thank you. Not all select. So I have a label that is wrapping a checkbox, basically. Well, this is why I wrap the label. Why I wrap the input in the label is because it is a good user experience to click on the label and the checkbox to be selected. I don't know if you have encountered forms where you click on the label and the checkbox doesn't select. Those are the worst forms there are to fill. So cool. So let's write this function. Oh. Let me see if I can share the link to that. I just sent out the link for the live share so that you can connect to my VS Code. So we have this input box. Let's add our function here at the top. Handle checkbox change receives the event as all event listeners do. And I'm going to do console log the checkbox was selected or was checked or unchecked. So whenever I have a checkbox, and we're gonna sort of change this example. I'm gonna have a checkbox here, or with a label that says another robot. And we have, well, actually we haven't connected this yet because we just have a function that is going to be on change that is just going to be console logging. So let's look at this. So if we have this correctly, now as I go to the browser, now I have the I'm not a robot. It looks a little bit weird because we have like all input boxes are inline elements, so they will not appear on separate lines by default. You will need to do that with CSS. Or wrapping all the elements like on divs or block level elements. Let me lower here. Okay, yeah, this looks a little bit better. So note how I click the label. This is a good user experience. Clicking the label and the checkbox checking and unchecking. This is a good user experience. If you have the user actually have to like click on this little tiny thing, you are just making a less enjoyable experience for your users. So now what I want to see is I have an unchanged event listener in this checkbox. Let's see if that is firing. As we go to the console, let's actually refresh. We have, at some point we're console logging our state here to see it. That is like in the render, I think. Let's find that. Yeah, in the render, here we're console logging our state to sort of check. Remember that render is a function that will always be called after a change to the state happens. But in here, we're interested to see, so we have this checkbox here with a label that says, I'm not a robot. And let's click on it. And we have the checkbox was checked or unchecked. And we see that even though we're like clicking on the label, the change event is still happening on the checkbox. That is because we have the label wrapping the checkbox. And if we remember that events in the DOM will bubble up, right? So if I'm clicking the label and the label has the checkbox as its child, then if I'm clicking the label has the checkbox inside, then I'm therefore sort of like indirectly clicking the checkbox. And we have the unchanged function, the unchanged event listener being called on whenever I click the label or whenever I click the actual checkbox. Now whether we have the checkbox checked or unchecked, we want to keep track of on our state, right? So right now I'm just calling an event listener that is just console logging. Now let's save this to our state. So what we can do there, or actually let me show you first. If we go to our handle checkbox change, let's console log here also the event that target that checked. And let's see that. So I'm gonna click. Now you got checkbox was checked or unchecked true. Click again. Checkbox was checked or unchecked false. And we have true and false. So the the checked property on a checkbox will tell us whether that checkbox was checked or not. And we're going to keep this in our state. Questions to this point? About the checkbox, about how we added an event listener that will listen for the change event, and what that event listener is doing. Yes?
Did you change the state?
No, I'm not changing the state yet. This function is not calling set state yet.
No, I'm just looking at in the code.
In the code?
Did you change it?
No.
Making sure.
Uh-huh. You may want to connect to that link that I sent out on to access the code. Cool. So this is the key here. The fact that just like an input box has the property value to tell us the content, the text that you put in, the checkbox has a property checked that tells us whether it's true that it's checked or false that the checkbox is not checked. And we're going to keep track of this in the state. So let's go back to here at the top. And let's say on our initial state, what would be a good name for keeping track of whether the checkbox is checked or not? Douglas?
Robot.
I agree that is a good name. So let's start false. Why would we start false? Yes? That's correct, because by default, when you have a checkbox, it will start as an unchecked box. So let's start with false. Then let's go down to our event handler and let's actually set our state. How do we set the state? This dot set state. This dot set state is a function. What do we pass to this function? An object, a new state that will be combined with the old state, with the state that we start with. Here we want to specify a property with the same name of the property that we want to change in our state, which is robot. And then I'm going to say this is going to be equal to the event that target that checked. Now let's save. And let's see, since we're console logging our state here in the render, we can see now that our state has password, robot false, submitted false, username empty string. Cool. So it's a good thing that we are console logging, and here we see our state. Remember that we could also inspect the state if we go to the components are in React Developer Tools. Cool. So now if we check the checkbox, we should see our state update, right? So let's click it. Now let's inspect. Robot true. Then let's check it again. Now robot is false. Let's check it again. True, false, true, false. You see it changing here? That is because we have a change event listener on that checkbox that whenever it changes from checked to unchecked or from unchecked to checked, is going to be called updating the state. But here we have that same problem that, for instance, this is another sort of, so we made this connection conceptually. Oh, actually, I was thinking that the name for this, for keeping this in the state, I think it should be, so the label is I'm not a robot. But when we're saying here, so yeah, this name actually is not as good because the label is saying the user should check this if they are not a robot, right? But then in here, I'm saying if in my state, I'm saying like robot true, where I'm actually saying the user is not a robot. So let's just change this name to not a or not just not robot. So if they're not a robot, we want to let them in. If they don't check that, then they are a bot, and we don't want to let them in. So I'm going to change that from robot to not robot. And then just check that it works exactly the same. True, false. Yep. So just we change the name to not a bot. Now, so we conceptually made this connection where whenever the user checks here, then there is a not robot that is going to be set to true, right? And whenever you uncheck it, then this goes to false. And then you check it again, and it goes back to true. But let's say now we want our reset button to, whenever you hit your reset button, to erase the content of the input boxes and uncheck this checkbox. How do we do that? We want to, so we still have a reset button. Whenever we hit this reset button, the input boxes are being erased, and we want this checkbox to also be unchecked. Currently, we don't have that behavior. So if I check the checkbox, I fill out this, and I hit reset. Oh, my username is not being reset, only my password. So since that we have a bug, let's do let's talk about this. Why isn't my username being reset? And why isn't my checkbox being unchecked when I click reset? So I want you to go on my code. So if you haven't joined, just join now. I see that only Joey, Owen, and Joanne are joined to the session. And I went, yes, Joanne? Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Maybe can you select maybe the area of code that you're looking at on, let's see, here. Then I can go to live share, and then I click on Joanne, and Joanne has the cursor here. Yeah, so I just gave you right access, so now you can type in there the answer basically, and you are correct. That is the answer. So what would we do here? Try now. Oh, I guess doesn't really work. Try now. Doesn't work because it says that you are now the option is to make read only. Let's change. So I guess let's do this. Yeah, I guess we can't. I'll need to look into that later. To configure the live share. But anyway, so here as Joanne suggested, we need to have the input box read its value from the state, so that when we change the state through the reset button, then the render gets called again, and that input box receives its new value coming from the state, which is going to be the empty string. So value equal this that, actually not this dot state, because we already have it, we're already bringing it in from with this structure in here. So it will be just username value. Username value. Let's see if this got rid of that bug that we had there. Fresh, type in there here, check the box, reset, and we have that same. We corrected that behavior where the username now is being reset. Now, I want you to do the same for the checkbox. Whenever I hit the reset button, I want the checkbox to go back to unchecked. So make that change. Yep.
That's what you need. Yeah, because you didn't. So basically you're looking at it using like a conflict.
Does it work?
Does it work when you I think that's an interesting piece. I think you might be so we have checks. But it might be that
Yeah, because it should only say if, like, we have that language section.
Okay, so what do we need to do here? To be able to reset the checkbox whenever you click the reset button. Hugo?
I've changed the for the checkbox, the on click to on change, and then
So we have it on change here.
yeah, and then I added it's like a property, yeah,
Uh-huh.
called check, and then I put the not robot in the return method.
So basically, what you're saying is let's explicitly set the checked property of this checkbox to be equal to whatever we have in the state. So if in the state is true, then the checkbox should be checked. If in the state we have false, the checkbox should be false. Should be unchecked. So let's just bring it from this structure in here. That is really handy so that I don't have to repeat myself. This, that, state, that. Not a robot. So let's say not robot there. And then here in checked, we're gonna say not robot. So like, don't really know. So like the pronunciation for robot is robot, not robot. Right? I don't know. I guess this is why here. Oh, this is really cool on Google Maps, or on just Google. I don't know if you guys. Well, I do this a lot, where it actually shows me like the mouth movement. Yeah.
Robot.
It's robot.
Robot. Robot.
Robot.
Robot.
What? Wait, where is British?
Robot. Robot. Robot.
Robot. Well, anyway, this is pretty cool. This must be because it's like almost any word they already have the visual. So this for like English learners is really cool.
This is new?
This is new. Yeah. This is a few years. So robot. Okay. Cool. So let's check this. Let's type in something here, another robot. And then let's hit reset, and everything goes back to blank. Cool. So this is this pattern again. That you are reading a value from a checkbox, from an input box. You're setting the state, and you want the state to feed back into that element, into that input box, into that checkbox. Questions about the checkbox? Yes.
Yeah, just the whole thing. It might not function right. Should you have to do something special for check?
So here,
Check like a keyword.
check is a property. It's a special property on checkboxes, or an input box, input type checkbox. And here I just have, I'm bringing in my not robot from the state. And then I have my function called handle checkbox change that is just going to set the state based on the checked or unchecked value of the input. Yes, Savita?
Comment how the check equals not robot and then do it.
Yeah. So this is actually what we had before, but let's see it. Yeah. What do you think is the expect? What do you think is going to happen?
It works for me when I hit reset, even without that.
Let's see. So you see the checkbox remain checked.
But it does update the state.
It did update the state. Oh, that's correct. Yes, if we look at the state here, we see that it went back from not robot, went back to false, and all the others went back to the empty string. So this is what I'm saying, where you want your state to be in sync with whatever the user is seeing with your UI, right? In here now, like my internal state got out of sync with what the user is seeing. Right? So like for instance, why would this be bad? Let's say they do that and we leave sort of this bug, and I try to register. Now the information that I will be sending is just this username and this password, but internally I will send the information that I have in my state. But in my state, I say that the no robot property is false, right? And then I will be sending wrong information even though the user is seeing that they checked the box, right? That is why we want to have an event listener reading the value out of the input, and a checked or a value property setting the value of that input explicitly from our state. Yes, Joanne?
I think you probably explained it earlier, but is checkbox a property, just like value or checkbox?
That's correct, yes. Checked is a property just like value. Yeah. Like,
Did you do anything special to make it like check when you hit the word, or is that just because it's in the label?
that is what we did special. The fact that we wrap the checkbox into the label.
So it's automatically going to do that.
That's correct, yes. Other questions or comments? Michael?
Yeah, it's wrapped in the
No, there's another method which is to the label. You can add a property called for, and then specify an ID in the input box. And as long as those two match, you're gonna get the same behavior. Yeah. So this is the same. So I'm gonna sort of duplicate it. I'm gonna comment this out. Oh, also, this is what JSX comments look like. Curly brackets / star, and then it closes with star / curly bracket. The other method will be closing the label here. Removing this from here, and then saying label for, let's say not robot, and then I'm going to specify an ID here with that same name. And now, because I have connected these two, this is a good error to see. It says invalid DOM property 4. Did you mean HTML4? And the answer is yes, I meant the HTML4. So just like we can't use like class to assign a CSS class to an element, because in JavaScript the class keyword has a special meaning, right? To create classes. For has a special meaning in JavaScript as well, to create for loops. So we need to say for HTML4. HTML4 will end up being for the HTML. And we get that same behavior. So these two are the same, they accomplish the same task, which is making the label clickable so that the checkbox is clicked. If you get rid of the HTML4, then you get a really bad user experience where I click this checkbox, where I click this label and the checkbox doesn't click. Now I have to be very careful to click this tiny piece in the page. So you want to have your label. For accessibility reasons, you should have your label connected to the checkbox. It's also the label behavior also applies to like input boxes. That you can have like an input box with a label username, and when you click that username label, the input box to type automatically receives focus, and then you can start typing. That is all part of good behavior and accessibility. Yes, Malik.
Put some like text in the username and password and it's
Here? Wait,
then it's
and then it's send it?
why does it go from center to like regular? Like, it went from
Oh.
regular to being centered.
So the question is like here, oops. Why does it go from like this, the content is center, then when I send it, it goes from like center to like a line left? That is because here I'm returning a completely different div. And this div doesn't have the class name app. which is the one that if I inspect in my CSS, I am doing text align center. Yeah, so it's just that this div doesn't have a class. I'm never centering it. Yeah, Cameron.
Did you ever put the checkbox inside the label? Or was it always outside?
No, it was inside of the label here. I left that commented. This is the version where it's inside of the label.
So I missed the part where why did you do that, or just to make sure the ID can connect to the.
Yeah, just so that when I click the label, the checkbox is checked automatically or unchecked by clicking the label. Yeah.
How did you open your CSS file?
How do I open it?
Yeah, you just.
Oh. I'm a fan of the shortcuts, so you can do Command P, and then you can type any file name and look at it without having to scroll through insanity. Yeah, Command P. Check out the VS Code shortcuts. They're good to have at hand. Cool. So the last thing that we want to show you is how to handle a select. I'm gonna leave this comment out here. I'm gonna just add like a comment, checkbox or label, wrapping checkbox. Checks, unchecks the checkbox. I'm gonna leave this commented for reference, and let's do a select. So for a select, we do just the same thing, which is select elements, and select inside will have options. You remember that options have also, we want to specify a value for each option. So let's say, so the first option, let's have the first option be something like none. Could also just be empty. The value will be equal to just an empty string. Or, well, empty string or none, yeah, that's fine. And then I'm gonna say, I'm gonna add a few more options. One for, these are in the lecture notes, are for like, what is it called? Titles. So in fact, I'm just gonna copy these options from here. You can type them from the lecture notes, which is basically an option for what title do you want once you register to our app. So how could we address you as a Mr., Miss, Mrs., I don't know what MX is, and Doctor. So let's look at what this looks like in our page. Refresh. We get some errors, but let's look at our select. It's looking good. Oh, I don't know why I don't see the none option. Oh, because I have a misspell on option. Is not plural, it's singular, and we have. So maybe this select should come like before the input boxes. So I'm gonna move this cut that. I'm going to put it at the top. Oops, but it has to be inside of the form. Inside of the form. So that we have here our select box. Cool. So here, are any questions to this point? Here we get the same drill of having an event listener and then setting the value of the select box in the same way that we did for the checkbox and the input elements. So, yes?
Can we put a title for the select box just after select, or do we need to wrap a label on that?
We could put a label. Let's do a label here with the for. Label HTML4 title, let's say. And let's give an ID to the select ID title. We can see that when I click the label, the select box gets focused, so that a person that doesn't have a mouse can still access this. For somebody that doesn't have a pointer, one, they could hit tab, and then with the arrows move up and down. Or if they click on it, they don't have to click on this box. They can click on it and then with the arrows move up or down. So other questions or comments about the select box? Simple select. It's exactly the same that as the one you will do in plain HTML. Remember that the value or whatever text you put inside of the two options, the opening option and the closing option tag, is what the user will see, right? And the value is what you will send in your once you're sending the data basically to a backend. So, for instance, a select box for like gender, you will probably show like male, female, and maybe non-binary. But you could send, instead of sending like that much text, like female, male, or non-binary, you will send like F for female, M for male, and N for non-binary. Right? Instead of having to send the entire text. Or maybe, or like in this case, we could imagine like if we were building a backend for this, we will be accepting those same values without the period and with all lowercase. So this is like our sort of like internal value, and this, what is inside is what the user will see. So same drill, we put on change in the select. I'm gonna call this function that handle select change. Then I'm gonna write that function here at the top before the render. Handle select change as all event listeners. It receives the event as an argument, and I'm just gonna set the state directly here. This dot set state. Let's say a property called title that's going to be equal to the event that target, that is referring to the select box, wherever the event happened, that value. Yes, Peter.
Does it matter if you do it that way or if you do it as a target selected index?
You could do it with selected index, but this is less cumbersome. Selected index is like you have to do which one is the index, and then try to key into the selected options. I don't remember what the array where the options are actually. So the answer is yes, you could do it with the selected index, but this is less of a hassle. Yeah. So let's see what this will cost. So this is like all the, also remembering that events are that interface between a user and our application. The user is generating events with stuff that they're doing in the page. We can listen for those events and do stuff according to those events. So so let's look at our state. Oh, I should also maybe start my initial state, just add like a title. Let's start with an empty string. Now we see that our state starting with a title as an empty string. Now I'm going to select something from here, Mr. And my state was set because I have an event listener listening for changes in the select box that is set in the state. And as I change to doctor, that is set on my title property in the state. Now, yeah. So, questions about how this is setting the state based on whatever I select. Also, like this is something that I saw when we were doing like DOM manipulation, where you will put a click event on the option instead of listening for a change event on the select. You don't want to put a click event on the option. That is just not the way in which we do it. We put an event listener to listen for change in the select. And this is changing, but here we have that same bug that we saw earlier, which is I hit my reset, everything goes back to blank, but my select box remains with the previous selection. And my state reflects otherwise. My state says not robot, false, password, empty, submitted, false, title, empty, username, value, empty. But title, empty, but the user is still seeing MX. So what's the fix for this? Setting the value on the select box as well. So since this is growing, I'm going to break it down into multiple lines like that. Let's set the value here to be equal to title, which is a property that I'm going to object this structure from the state here at the top. And as this grew a little bit, I like to separate it in like multiple lines here too, where I do something like this. And this structuring the username value, the password submitted, not robot, title from the this.state object. And let's see, as I click on hit reset, now my form resets completely. questions about the select with the options, reading the value, setting the value, etc.? No questions? So let's do then the last thing is, let's say we want to, at this point, if I hit send, and my form is empty, I'm allowing to send an empty form. So let's do some like simple input validation, which is just not allowing the user to submit an empty form. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna have a function here at the top that actually I'm just gonna copy from the lesson and explain it. Is this function all fields valid? So if we look at this function, this is checking if the not robot title, we call it first name here. I'm going to call it username value, and then the not last name, we call it password. So basically, if the not robot, the title, the username, and the password are all truthy values, then I'm going to allow the form to be submitted. Otherwise, I'm going to prevent the form from being submitted because I don't want to, fill my database with empty data, right? So what we can do here is then we can just call this function on our handle form submit, where I'm going to say if this that all fields are valid, then submit the form. Else don't do nothing. Don't do anything. So because this function, the all fields valid function will return true or false. It will return true if all the fields have at least something. And it will return false if one of them doesn't have a valid, or it will return false if one of them is false, basically, or if one of them is false. Then here what we have is just a simple if check, that if all the fields are valid, meaning they have something in, all the values are truthy, let's console log form submitted and set the state to submitted true. So what this does is that then once we go back here, I have an error on line 68. Oh, I'm missing a curly bracket here. Then what this causes is, bless you, that if I try to send the form, it's not going to let me send the form because this is an empty string. Remember that none, we have an empty string in our state, right? Title, just empty string. The username is empty. Empty string is falsy. Password is empty. Empty string is falsy. Not a robot is false. Now let's fill out some of them. Let's maybe fill out this two. The title and the I'm not a robot. Now can I send? No, I can't send. Can't send it because this function is doing the check. Was the not robot is the not robot true or truthy? Is the title truthy? Those two are truthy actually in this case because I have it checked and I have something in here. But then it's also checking, is the username truthy? An empty string is not truthy, it's a falsy. Then this returns false. Then in our check, in our if statement here, because we know that this will return false, then we just don't do anything. If this returns true, we submit the form. Currently is returning false. So let's add something here, try to send. No, we can't send yet. A one-length password, and now we can send the data because all the fields, all the form elements had something that was truthy. So any final questions, thoughts, concerns, worries? This is life. Yes, do this.
Where does submit live again? Or is it, no, there it is, I'm sorry, never mind.
In the state? Yeah, Malik.
So when you go in on the input validation, something you're gonna do in both the back and front end?
Yes, that is a good question. Input validation is something you want to do in both the front end and the back end. Yeah. For sure in the back end. Like if you skip input validation in the back end, then people can really pollute your database. Other questions? Cool. So let's get started on the lab. The lab I think we have an hour and a half, which I think is actually right about enough time, because this lab is, let me show you here, React Forms lab. You basically have to create this app that we're seeing here. So we have to create an app that replicates this behavior, which is you put a list of numbers separated by commas, and then you select an operation that you want to do from a select box. If I select sum and I hit calculate, the button calculate is going to sum all those numbers. And if I hit average, I'll calculate the average. If I hit mode, it's going to find the most common number. And then if I put an invalid input like a T or a letter or something that's not a number, a message should appear underneath saying invalid input. Yep. So yes, other questions about the lab? Cool. So for this one, you will need to run create React app yourself. We did create React app for you in the previous React labs. But we want you to get used to having to do it yourself. So you just have to run create React app to initialize an app, a React app, and then start changing it to accommodate this behavior. Then if you're done with that, there is this bonus that is building basically a more complex form where it's sort of like about a Mars mission registration form where you have to specify. There is like checkboxes, radio buttons, select boxes, input text areas that will just help you exercise more of form behaviors in React. Yes?
So now you have lab question. That's worked, I guess, before you made the change.
Oh, yeah.
So is it fine the way it is, or should I?
That's fine, that's fine. Yeah. I did notice that. I think somebody else did. I think maybe Brianna, maybe it was you. Yeah, you had cloned a little bit like earlier. The only difference is that I removed the create React app. So you don't have to do the create React app. That's fine. Everyone else is fine. Cool, so that's it. For tomorrow we have the like the potluck thing going on from, I think it's 5 or 6. Let's just check the calendar. Yeah, 5 to 8. So let's just like hang out with the rest of the Pursuit community. Sharing, I saw that some of you are bringing stuff. I don't know what to bring. I think I'm gonna bring watermelon because I really like watermelon.
We have salt here, right?
And salt?
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Now let me know if you have any other ideas. If you haven't signed up and you want to sign up, just you can ask me for the link, and I can share it. Yeah, that's correct. Benny is not coming tomorrow. What we're gonna do is we're gonna work on the code for those questions that we saw last week about like the parking lot, the reversing the linked list, and I forgot the other one. I think it was valid parentheses. I think, which we'll use a stack. And that will be for tomorrow. But tomorrow, like class will start at 8 basically, after we're sharing. Cool. So let me know. I'm gonna stay until 11. So if you have questions, feel free to stay after and ask. Yeah. And just reach out. Give me 1 sec.